On a cold, desolate night, a group of police officers dragged a woman into the darkness, tying her to a tree, thinking they had silenced her for good. What they didn't know was that she wasn't just another journalist poking around. She was someone with the power to bring their entire corrupt empire crashing down. How will she rise from the brink of death to dismantle the very system that tried to destroy her? And when justice finally comes knocking, will those who betrayed the law be able to escape their fate? Stay tuned to uncover the full story. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Blast off. The city of Ridgway, nestled in the heart of the Midwest, had long been shrouded in corruption and violence. The streets emptied after dark, neighborhoods left to decay, and police patrols that served not to protect, but to control. For years, unexplained disappearances, suspicious deaths, and tampered reports had become part of life. The people knew better than to ask questions, because in Ridgway, defiance often came at the cost of one's life. Naomi Porter, a sharp-eyed black woman with an unbreakable spirit, stepped off the bus into the cold afternoon air. Her long coat billowed slightly in the wind as she adjusted the strap of her bag. Inside, she carried files, notes, and a voice recorder, tools of her trade. Though she wasn't just any journalist, she was a federal investigator assigned to uncover the crimes buried beneath Ridgway's carefully maintained facade. She walked into a small cafe on the corner of a quiet street, the kind of place where conversations were whispered and secrets were exchanged. She had an appointment with Terrence Miller, a local activist who had risked everything to expose the corruption in Ridgway's police force. As she took a seat near the back, a weary-looking black man in his late 40s approached her table, his eyes scanning the room with caution before he spoke. "You Naomi Porter?" Terrence asked, his voice low and deliberate. Naomi nodded, pulling out a small notebook. "What do you have for me?" she asked, her tone professional but firm. Terrence glanced around once more, ensuring no one was listening, then slid a small USB drive across the table. "Everything you need is in there. Case files, reports that were buried, and proof that high-ranking officers are covering for criminals." Naomi picked up the USB, her grip tightening slightly. "If this is real, I won't let this stay hidden." Terrence let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "You think you can change Ridgway? I'm not saying don't try, but don't let them see you coming." Naomi didn't answer. She simply pocketed the USB, already knowing that she had just stepped onto a battlefield where the rules were written in blood. Naomi Porter knew that uncovering the truth in Ridgway wouldn't be easy. Corruption was embedded in every corner of the city, and those in power had spent years silencing anyone who dared to question them. But she wasn't here to play it safe. She was here to expose the rot at the core of Ridgway's police force. Over the next few days, Naomi dove deep into her investigation. She spent hours reviewing the files Terrence had given her, cross-referencing names, dates, and incidents. The reports painted a chilling picture: cases of black men and women being arrested under false charges, people disappearing after routine traffic stops, and officers who had been accused of excessive force multiple times yet still patrolled the streets. Each case had been conveniently swept under the rug, the evidence either manipulated or lost. One name kept appearing in the reports: Sergeant William Connors, a senior officer with a reputation for brutality. He had been involved in multiple cases where suspects ended up severely injured, or worse, dead. But he had never faced consequences. His reports were always vague. The security cameras always seemed to malfunction, and witnesses conveniently retracted their statements. Naomi knew she had to get closer. She reached out to Malik Grant, a young officer who had expressed quiet frustration with the department's culture. They met in an empty parking lot, late at night, the glow of the streetlights casting long shadows over the asphalt. "You know, this is dangerous, right?" Malik asked, glancing around as if expecting someone to be listening. Naomi tucked her hands into her coat pockets, nodding. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't worth the risk." Malik hesitated, then sighed. "The department is rotten, Naomi. Everyone knows it, but no one talks about it. Connors and his guys, they do whatever they want. The chief, Doyle, he protects them. As long as they keep the city in line, he looks the other way." "How deep does this go?" Naomi pressed. Malik ran a hand over his face, clearly struggling with what he was about to say. "Deep. You ever wonder why none of these cases make it to trial? The DA's office, the judges, some of them are in on it too. If you start digging too hard, people disappear." Naomi clenched her jaw. "I'm not stopping." Malik exhaled sharply, nodding. "I figured you'd say that. Listen, there's a bar downtown, the Rusty Nail. That's where Connors and his guys drink after their shifts. If you want to hear what they really think, that's the place to go." That night, Naomi found herself sitting in the dimly lit bar, a whiskey in front of her that she had no intention of drinking. She kept her head down, her baseball cap pulled low as she listened. A group of off-duty officers sat at a nearby table, their voices carrying over the dull hum of the jukebox. "I swear, these activists are getting bolder," one of them muttered. "Think they can just waltz in and change the way things work." "They don't know how things really run," another said. "People like us, we're the law. The mayor, the feds, none of them can touch us." Naomi's pulse quickened. She didn't need to look up to know that Connors was among them. "And that reporter?" A third voice spoke up. "The black woman poking around? Someone needs to remind her where she is." The table erupted in laughter, and Naomi's stomach twisted. They were already watching her. She stood up quietly and left, her mind racing. She had enough to know that she was in real danger, but not enough to stop them. Not yet. As she walked down the dark streets back to her motel, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated before answering. "Ms. Porter," a voice on the other end said, smooth but menacing. "You're asking a lot of questions. That's not good for your health." Click. The line went dead. Naomi slowed her steps, her breath steady but her mind sharp. They knew who she was, and they were coming. Naomi had dealt with threats before, but this was different. The call had been a warning, a signal that the police weren't just aware of her presence. They were watching her every move. And in a city like Ridgeway, that meant she was in serious danger. She stayed alert over the next few days, taking different routes home, avoiding familiar places, and keeping her phone close. But no matter how careful she was, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. Then, one cold evening, it happened. Naomi had been working late in her motel room, piecing together everything she had learned. The files, the conversations, the whispered confessions. It was all starting to form a clear picture. She had enough evidence to expose them, but she also knew she had to act fast. She packed up her laptop and notes, ready to drive out of town, to a secure location where she could send her findings to her contacts in Washington. But as soon as she stepped out of the motel, she felt it. That eerie stillness, the kind that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Her car was parked just a few feet away. She quickened her pace, her fingers gripping the keys in her pocket. But before she could reach the driver's side door, a pair of headlights flooded the parking lot. A black SUV screeched to a stop in front of her. She turned to run, but it was too late. "Evening, Miss Porter," a voice drawled behind her. She spun around just in time to see Sergeant William Connors step out from the shadows, his face illuminated by the orange glow of the street lamp. He wasn't alone. 3 other officers flanked him, their hands resting casually on their holstered guns. Going somewhere?" Connors smirked. Naomi forced herself to stay calm. "I don't think I owe you an explanation, Sergeant." He chuckled. "You see, that's where you're wrong. People like you think you can come into our city, dig through our business, and walk away like it's nothing. But Ridgeway doesn't work that way." She clenched her fists. "You're making a mistake." Connors stepped closer, his expression turning cold. "No, sweetheart, you did." Before she could react, something hard slammed into the back of her head. A sharp, blinding pain shot through her skull. And then, darkness. When Naomi came to, the first thing she felt was the cold air biting at her skin. Her body ached, her wrists burned, and her head throbbed with a sharp, pounding pain. It took her a moment to register what was happening. She was hanging upside down, her ankles bound tightly by a thick rope, tied to the branch of a tree in the middle of nowhere. The world spun as she tried to focus. She could hear the sound of leaves crunching, heavy footsteps approaching. Connors and his men stood beneath her, watching her like a pack of wolves. "Look at that," one of them laughed. "The big shot reporter doesn't look so tough now." Naomi forced herself to breathe, to stay conscious. "You don't scare me," she said, her voice hoarse. Connors smirked. "That's cute. But see, it's not about scaring you. It's about sending a message." One of the officers pulled out a knife, running the blade along the rope that held her. "People need to know what happens when they don't respect the law," Connors continued. "And you're gonna be the perfect example." Naomi's mind raced. If they cut the rope, if they left her out here to die, no one would find her. No one would ever know the truth. But she wasn't about to let them win. She twisted her wrists, feeling the friction of the rope against her skin. It hurt like hell, but she didn't stop. They were too busy laughing, too sure of themselves to notice. Then, snap. Her right hand broke free. It was now or never. With one swift motion, she grabbed the nearest officer by the wrist, twisting hard. He yelped in pain, dropping the knife. Naomi swung her legs, using the momentum to kick Connors square in the chest. "Shit! Grab her!" someone shouted. But she was already moving. Naomi hit the ground hard, rolling onto her side. As she scrambled to her feet, blood rushed back to her head, making her dizzy. But she forced herself to run. Behind her, the officers cursed, fumbling for their guns. A gunshot rang out, the bullet grazing past her shoulder. She didn't stop. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard the sound of a car approaching. Headlights cut through the trees. Then a voice, young, panicked. "Get in!" Naomi didn't hesitate. She threw herself into the passenger seat, just as the driver slammed on the gas. The tires screeched against the dirt road, sending dust flying into the air. As the car sped away, Naomi turned to look at her rescuer. A young black man, barely in his 20s, his hands trembling against the wheel. Who are you?" she asked, breathless. He glanced at her, his jaw tight. "Jordan Willis. And I think I just saved your ass." Naomi's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as she slumped into the passenger seat. Her body ached from the assault, her wrists raw from the tight ropes, and blood trickled from the wound on her shoulder. But she was alive. That was all that mattered. The car sped down the narrow, dirt-covered road, bouncing over every pothole and loose rock. Naomi tried to steady her breathing, her fingers gripping the dashboard. "Who are you?" she rasped, still trying to process what had just happened. The young man at the wheel barely glanced at her, his hands clenched tightly around the steering wheel. "Jordan Willis," he said, his voice tense. "And right now, I'm the only person in this damn city who isn't trying to kill you." Naomi forced herself to focus. His name sounded familiar. "Willis, your brother." Jordan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, Aaron Willis. Pulled over for a routine stop last year. They said he resisted arrest. 3 bullets in his back. No body cam footage. No trial. No justice." Naomi swallowed hard. She had read about Aaron's case in the files Terrence gave her. His was just one of many names, buried beneath fabricated police reports. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. Jordan scoffed. "Save it. Sorry doesn't bring him back." For a moment, the only sound in the car was the roar of the engine and the wind whipping through the broken window. Then Jordan glanced at her again, his expression dark. "They were gonna kill you, weren't they?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Or worse. They wanted to make an example out of me." Jordan exhaled sharply. "Yeah, well, screw that." They drove in silence for a few miles before Naomi finally spoke again. "Where are we going?" "Safe house," Jordan said. "I know a guy, underground activist, keeps his ear to the ground. He's got a place where they won't find you." Naomi hesitated. Trust was dangerous, but right now she didn't have a choice. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "But this isn't over. They think they can silence me. They're wrong." Jordan smirked slightly, nodding as he pressed harder on the gas. "Good. 'Cause I want in." The safe house was a small abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Ridgeway. The moment Jordan pulled up, the metal doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Inside, a few men and women sat around an old wooden table, their eyes narrowing as Naomi stepped out of the car, her body battered and bruised. A tall, older man with graying hair and a sharp gaze approached them. "You brought trouble, Jordan." Jordan scoffed. "She's not trouble, Marcus. She's the only shot we've got at taking those bastards down." Marcus studied Naomi for a long moment before nodding toward an empty chair. "Sit." Naomi lowered herself into the chair, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. She had been through hell, but she wasn't done yet. "You're not just a reporter, are you?" Marcus asked, arms crossed. Naomi met his gaze. "No." The room fell silent. "I'm a federal investigator," she admitted, "sent by the Justice Department to look into Ridgeway's police force. What I've found so far? It's worse than even Washington thought." Jordan let out a low whistle. "So, you were undercover this whole time?" Naomi nodded. "I came here as a journalist because I needed to get close to the people who have been silenced. I've gathered enough evidence to expose them. The murders, the cover-ups, the corruption running through this city." Marcus exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his beard. "And now, they know who you are, which means they won't stop until you're dead." Naomi leaned forward. "That's why I need your help. They tried to take me out, but they failed. Now, I need to go on the offensive." Jordan smirked. "You're talking my language now." Marcus exchanged a glance with the others before finally nodding. "All right, we'll help. But if we do this, we do it smart. We get the people on our side. We make it so big that the feds can't ignore it." Naomi's lips curled into a determined smile. That's exactly the plan. She may have barely survived, but now the real fight was about to begin. Naomi didn't waste any time. With Marcus, Jordan, and the rest of the underground activists backing her, she set her plan into motion. The first step was ensuring the evidence she had collected didn't just stay buried in another forgotten report. It had to reach the public, and more importantly, the federal authorities who could dismantle Ridgway's corrupt police force from the top down. Late that night, in the dimly lit safe house, Naomi plugged her USB drive into a laptop. The room was quiet, the air thick with tension, as files loaded onto the screen, documents, video footage, audio recordings, all proving the horrifying extent of the abuse within the Ridgway Police Department. "This is it," she murmured, scrolling through the files. "This is everything we need." Jordan leaned over her shoulder, shaking his head in disbelief. "Jesus, they've been getting away with this for years." Marcus crossed his arms. "And they would have kept getting away with it if you hadn't come along." Naomi nodded. "I need to get this to my contact in Washington. Once the feds have this, Doyle and his whole department won't be able to hide." Marcus grunted. "You sure they won't bury it? Corruption doesn't just stop at city lines." Naomi met his gaze. "Not this time. I've made sure this information reaches the right people. And we're not just handing it over quietly. We're making sure the world sees it too." She turned the laptop toward Jordan. "You said you wanted in." He nodded. "Tell me what to do." Naomi smirked. "You're about to make history." They divided the evidence into multiple copies, one sent directly to the Justice Department, another to an independent investigative journalist, and a third uploaded to a public whistleblower site. Within hours, the reports went viral. News outlets picked up the story, headlines plastered across the country. Exposed: corruption and brutality in Ridgway's police department. By the next morning, federal agents arrived in Ridgway, raiding police headquarters. Officers were suspended, and an official investigation into Chief Doyle and Sergeant Connors was launched. The city erupted in protests, demanding justice for the victims who had suffered under the corrupt system for years. Naomi watched from the sidelines, battered but victorious. The truth was finally out, and this time, there was no silencing it. A week after the federal investigation began, Ridgway was a city transformed. Police Chief Doyle had been placed on administrative leave. Sergeant Connors was arrested for obstruction of justice, and dozens of officers were suspended pending further review. But more than that, the people of Ridgway had finally found their voice. Naomi stood on the steps of City Hall, looking out over the sea of people gathered in protest. Signs demanding justice waved in the air, chants echoing through the streets. For the first time in years, fear was no longer the ruling force in Ridgway. Marcus and Jordan stood beside her, their faces filled with the same determination that had fueled them from the beginning. Naomi took a deep breath before stepping up to the microphone. The crowd fell silent. "They tried to silence us," Naomi said, her voice strong despite the bruises still healing on her face. "They thought they could bury the truth, that we would stay afraid. But look around you. Look at what happens when we stand together." The crowd erupted into cheers. "Justice isn't a gift, it's something we fight for," she continued. "And this fight isn't over. Ridgway deserves more than corrupt leaders. It deserves real change, and we won't stop until we get it." Jordan grinned, nudging Marcus. "She's good." Marcus chuckled. "She's damn good." As Naomi looked out at the people she had fought for, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The battle wasn't over, but one thing was clear: Ridgway would never be the same again, and neither would she. Naomi's story is more than just a tale of corruption and justice. It's a reflection of the world we live in. Injustice thrives when people are too afraid to speak up, and those in power rely on silence to maintain their control. But as this story shows, one voice can spark a movement, and truth is the most powerful weapon against oppression. The lesson here is clear. Never underestimate the power of persistence and courage. Naomi refused to back down, even when the system tried to break her. She knew that real change doesn't come from waiting. It comes from action. In our own lives, we can apply this by standing up against injustices, whether in our workplaces, communities, or beyond. Additionally, this story reminds us to stay informed and support independent journalism and activism. Corruption thrives in the shadows, and exposing the truth is the first step toward accountability. Most importantly, Naomi's journey shows that change is possible, but it requires collective effort. We can't fight alone. We need allies, truth, and unwavering determination to challenge unjust systems. Because when people stand together, even the most corrupt institutions can fall. Naomi's story is not just about fighting corruption. It's a powerful reminder that truth only has power when we have the courage to stand up for it. She knew the risks, the dangers, yet she still chose the difficult path to fight for justice. So, if you were in her position, what would you do? Choose number 1. If you would fight to the very end, no matter the danger, to expose the truth and stand up for what's right. Choose number 2. If you believe that sometimes compromise and avoiding risk is the best way to protect yourself and those around you. Drop a 1 or 2 in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to help spread the message of justice and courage. Blast off!